Welcome to Eye on the Illini, folks. This is one of the most exciting moments for me in working this job with the Illini guys. I have the privilege and the opportunity to interview Loren Tate as somebody who loved when his columns came out in the News Gazette and voraciously read them every time he wrote an article. And I listened to the show on Saturday mornings. I'm so excited to have Loren on. He'll be back right after these messages, and it is going to be a fun interview, guaranteed. Welcome to Eye on the Illini, folks. We have what is categorized as a real treat today. We have Loren Tate on, longtime man who's been covering the Illini for the News Gazette for quite some time. And I have to tell you, folks, I watch Loren covering the Illini now, and I hope I have half of that energy right now today that he has. It is amazing.
Don't worry, you've got more energy than I do.
I'm not so certain there, Loren, but I'll tell you, you have been covering the Illini since the mid to late 60s. Can you give people, because I don't think people understand the treasure trove of information that you have about Illini sports, but can you give people a little bit of an idea of how you ended up covering the Fighting Illini?
Well, I'll try to make a really quick story. I was born in Kentucky. My dad died. And we went to my grandparents and lived in Hoofston, and my mother ultimately married a man from Monticello, Illinois, and we moved there. He ran the newspaper and was a sports guy. So I got in on the newspaper side of it right from the very beginning. And, I went to the third grade in Monticello and all the way through high school, and was a pretty well-known I almost led the area in scoring. I finished second in basketball scoring, and I played a lot of baseball. So people kind of knew me. And then I went to service, came back and started an EI League baseball team in Monticello. A fellow by the name of Akers Vaughn and I we put it together. And I'm calling in the games on Monday morning for the News Gazette, which ran box scores in those days. And a guy answering on the phone on the other end at the News Gazette was T.O. White. And T.O. said, "I just got a call from a man in Hammond, Indiana, who has an opening on his sports staff. Would you be interested in it?" Well, I'd only been back from the Army less than a month. And I said, "Well, I'll look into it." Short story, I went to Hammond. I worked there 11 years. Okay. And then I got the job offer. In 63, I interviewed for the News Gazette job, but I wasn't sports editor at the time. In 66, when I interviewed the second time, I was the sports editor at the Hammond Times, and I had been informed about the opening on the News Gazette by Lou Baker, who was on the football staff. He was also from Monticello. He was my Legion baseball coach. He coached Butkus. He was a linebacker coach. And he called me in Hammond and said, "Hey, there's this job's coming open." So I came down and got the job before anybody knew it was open. And that's how I got that job. But I had attended Illinois football games in 1946, got the job in 66. But all this time, I'm an Illinois fan and I'm a jock. I mean, that's all I was. I didn't know what I was going to get into, and took the job. And about 3 months later, the Slush Fund hit in December of 66. And I've been dazed ever since.
Well, now, I think that's an interesting thing we probably need to talk about. And I'm going to speak directly to the younger fans out there. This is the part you have to listen to, because the Slush Fund is in large part why you see these schools pushing back so hard and trying to take a legal approach against the NCAA, because what was a very pivotal moment for the Illini. Let's have you explain what happened. If you could set the table and then what Illinois got in trouble for, et cetera.
Okay, well, it was 1960. Actually, the Slush Fund started around 60, 61. And they had three funds. They had the Doug Mills Athletic Directors Fund, Football Fund, and the Basketball Fund. And they were basically taking care of situations that needed to be taken care of, whatever it was, whether it was somebody had illness, whether they had didn't have enough money to. The part of it that we forget is that the NCAA permitted $30 a month, but the Big Ten didn't. So in some cases, like Rich Jones and Ron Dunlap, they were actually paying them $30-35 a month, which was just what they could have gotten somewhere else. But the Big Ten had rules, and so at the end of the '66 football season, Pete Elliott, the football coach, had been selected to be the athletic director at the University of Illinois by the Board of Trustees, and by the athletic board and the Board of Trustees. And Doug Mills' assistant, Mel Brewer, became very upset about it. And I remember his statement, "I'll never let a Michigan man." Pete was from Bloomington, Illinois, but he attended Michigan and won a whole bunch of letters. I don't know how many, more than 8 or 9. I mean, he lettered in everything. But the point was that Brewer was upset that he wasn't going to get the job because he was the assistant athletic director, and turned over the papers on the 3 slush funds to the president of the university, who then had to inform the Big Ten that they were in violation. And I was in Chicago at that December for a doubleheader at the basketball doubleheader up there. I'm trying to remember which. I can't remember, UCLA, USC. I can't remember who the team was that Illinois was playing that night, because I got lost because Harry Combs, the basketball coach, was faced with a situation of explaining. Of course, he couldn't explain it. And long story short, Elliott lost his job. Of course, Doug Mills had resigned, which started the whole thing as athletic director, and Harry Combs is gone, and now Pete Elliott's gone. So, and with Pete Elliott went most of the staff as well, football staff. That's what the slush fund was, and a number of players were declared ineligible, including Rich Jones and Ron Dunlap, and Cruz and Kuberski and several others were involved, but didn't have to pay heavy penalties. But Jones and Dunlap were done. They were never able to play again. This set Illinois back in basketball by quite a bit, you can imagine.
This is at a time when we can now read books and see that guys at Ohio State and Alabama were admitting to getting cars and things like that.
Everybody cheated, yeah. I remember they told me that Doug Mills met with Red Mackey over at Purdue to find out how Purdue was doing it, and kind of copied their system.
Yeah, it was a time that really knocked Illinois back in football and in basketball, and it also culturally hit Illinois very hard, because even as a guy who was in high school and college, I worked up in Mumford Hall, and I would have people talk about the fear of the NCAA professors and stuff like that. And this was in the mid to late 1980s. There was still that, oh my gosh, the NCAA, I think it scarred a whole generation of people because it put the teams back so far. And I think at the same time, Michigan hired Bo Schembechler, and Michigan had been, for Michigan, they had had a rough decade and a half of football. And at the time, then Illinois got knocked back a little bit, and then boom, here comes Bo. There's a gap, and Bo not only took that gap, but he went way higher and brought Michigan back.
Illinois got knocked back more than a little.
Yeah.
Because the basketball program was really hit hard. As you know, Harv Schmidt had 5 or 6 really tough years and turned it over to Gene Bartow, ultimately to Lou Henson, who also took several years before he got the thing pretty well straightened out in the 1980s. But and football, we lost some good players at the time, but the reputation was really hurt of the university, yes, of the football program. And we've been off and on in football really ever since, except for the period when we had back-to-back White and Makovic, who were pretty successful. I mean, Mike was very successful for a while, but then he got fired for cheating. And then Makovic came in and did a good job for a couple of years, won a Big Ten championship, won 10 games in another year, right at the end, 89, 90. And since that time, it's been pretty iffy. Turner had one good team, Zook had one really good team, and that's about it. up to now.
Yeah, it's hard to explain to people, like, when you take a look at what Bret Bielema faces as a head coach. There's been a whole generation of high school coaches, let's say in the western suburbs of Chicago, who've really never seen a sustained time of success for Illinois. Meanwhile, Iowa's been great, Wisconsin's been great, Michigan's been great, Ohio State's been great, Notre Dame's been pretty good. Quite a
Yep.
challenge.
Yeah. One thing that was different was Wisconsin had a system that worked for 2 decades or more. And, it was all one system that was carried on through. And Iowa kept their staff forever. I don't know how many offensive and defensive coordinators Illinois has lost over the time, but it's many more. Every coach had multiple coordinators, and I'm just happy, Lonnie's coming back again, and we got a chance to hold something that maybe could have worked last year and didn't quite, but maybe with another year and a quarterback that's got another year behind him. Quarterbacks are always better the second year in the system, and so are offensive coordinators. They just are. It takes a while to get that stuff ingrained. You want it to become automatic for the players.
Yeah, and I think Aaron Henry's in a good place too, approaching his second season. I saw a stat a couple weeks ago that said 23 of the last 26 national champions had a returning quartet of a returning head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and starting quarterback.
Is that right?
And so I'm thinking that puts Illinois in the running for the national title this year. I'm not certain we're going to get that level, but hey, you know what? If a statistic works for you, you got to use it.
Well, everything looks different to me now when you add these 4 teams in the West Coast. I mean, this is ridiculous to try to wade through this schedule now when you got to play Oregon, and you got Washington and USC and UCLA are on the league, and it's going to be a tough one, boy. It's going to be hard to get to the top of an 18-team conference. How long do you think that'll go on? How long before they find something a little more reasonable?
Here's what I think is going to happen. I think as the Big Ten and the SEC absorb some more teams, I think we will see the rebirth of regional college football, because let's say the Big Ten goes to 24 teams. That would mean they will have 4 6-team divisions. And all of a sudden you could see, especially if they added a couple more teams on the West, the left side of the country, you could see a division that might look something like Nebraska, Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Northwestern for a division. And all of a sudden you get some regional battles back. And I don't know exactly what teams they would do, but to me, I actually think going to 24 would make it more fun for the fans. It would be a little more NFL like, where your division, you fight every year.
You've got to have natural opponents. We should be playing Iowa and Indiana, Purdue, Northwestern, Wisconsin every year, every single year.
Yep. And I think that could lend to making that a little bit more possible. You keep hearing Florida State, and I'm not certain how you schedule that, but if you have Florida State, and then there's even rumors that Texas A&M is now frustrated with the SEC.
Well, they want the Big Ten.
Yes, and
they've been negotiating for 6 months behind the scenes.
Exactly.
I know that.
Exactly. And at some point,
but you got to have somebody bring in with them.
Yeah.
Notre Dame.
Well, that's the Florida State, Notre Dame. Now you need a fourth. I mean, it could snowball. I keep looking at Utah out west, and I keep looking at Stanford. Maybe you can grab those two if you wanted to go to 24, and then you'd have a 6-team division out west that the travel isn't crazy, and you would have your Midwest groups, and then Florida State. I don't know how we're gonna. Maybe you bring in Clemson. I never thought Clemson was a good academic fit with the Big Ten, but maybe they would be. I don't know.
I know that Florida State is not.
Right.
I also know that Florida, the University of Florida, does not want Florida State in the same conference, the SEC.
Yes.
You don't want them. So where does Florida State go? If I think they probably wind up in the SEC. I don't think the Big Ten presidents, I'm told flat out that the Big Ten presidents will not accept Florida State.
Yeah, and it will be
I'm talking
interesting.
about the AAU,
No, totally with you.
Yeah, and so we'll find out. I thought there was a time when I thought they would accept them, but I'm hearing different.
Yeah, and that's the bone of contention, because you look at it, and especially if the AACC were to fragment, I got to think from an academic standpoint, North Carolina and Virginia would be just prime candidates. Obviously, even though Notre Dame doesn't have the graduate programs, it's Notre Dame.
Oh, Notre Dame would be accepted in a minute. We've offered Notre Dame before.
Yep, exactly. And the biggest thing I really have to think, and this is maybe me just being delusional, but if Jim Delaney had been around, I see no way that Texas would have ever made it to the SEC. He would have found some way to get them in the Big Ten, because they are such a good fit.
Yeah. Now we're kind of dealing with Texas A&M at a point when, I would rather have Texas probably, but Texas A&M doesn't want to be in the same conference with Texas.
I keep hearing about this, this super conference, which I don't think will ever happen. But Texas A&M is a great example of what would happen if you tried to do a super conference. Because look, Ohio State has had 5 losing seasons since 1951. If you put them in a 20-team super conference where they might have a losing season now and again because they're playing the likes of Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, Oregon, I don't think those fans of those schools, I don't think they can emotionally handle what an Illinois or Indiana or Purdue fan has had to handle, where you have losing seasons.
Well, they wouldn't be able to handle it. You're right. They're already going crazy over 3 straight losses to Michigan. But if you're talking about 2 tiers, and one tier has 36 or 42 or 48 teams, however you pick a number, there'll be games, they won't all be the top teams. There'll be some teams that aren't top 25 that Ohio State will be playing. They won't be playing the top every single year. So the problem that I have with it, and the question I have for you is, first of all, if they broke at 30, let's say 32, or they broke at 48, Illinois would not be in it. They would not be in that top tier because they've had losing season 18 of the last 23. Their TV viewership is way down. It's below the 11th in the Big Ten. They just don't, attendance is 10,000 below what the actual sales are on an average every game. Illinois would not be in it. Yeah, and I've always said, Illinois will be in it. They've got the Chicago market. We don't have the Chicago market. That's not true. We never get a top 10 player out of Chicago. Or if we do, he's the 10th. We've had several years there where we have. So my question for you, is Illinois better off as the bottom of the top tier or at the top of the lower tier?
That's a question that it's clear is on Josh Whitman's mind.
He wants to be in the top tier for sure.
Exactly. And I do think, by my way of looking at it, the biggest challenge the Illini have from a fundraising standpoint is when an Ohio State fundraiser opens up their back door, they've got over 1 million people in Columbus and the businesses that are spawned from 1 million population. You walk out the door in Champaign-Urbana and you got 150,000, which means you have to go up to Chicago, and now you're competing. And people who've heard my podcast know I look at Chicago as the capital of the Midwest. And you've got alumni from Northwestern, Michigan, Michigan State, Iowa, Wisconsin, Notre Dame, Minnesota, and it's such a big aggregation that you can never, quote, own Chicago. So as an Illinois head coach, it puts a lot of pressure on you because you've got this population center that raises expectations, but it's not your backyard.
Everybody is 1 hour away by flight.
Exactly. And I lived down in Georgia for a couple of years prior to Kirby Smart taking over, and they had the same problem there with Atlanta. Even in Georgia football, as strong as it was in those days, and they were winning 10 games a year, they just weren't winning titles. they had a hard time because when there was a good player, Ohio State came in, USC came in, Auburn was there, the whole SEC, and they had their challenges. Atlanta, to me, is the capital of the Southeast. You got Dallas as capital of the South. You got LA as capital of the West, and New York City. Well, there's no college in New York City that dominates because of their pro sport heritage. But, you know, you have Georgia kind of getting Atlanta. You have Texas kind of getting Dallas. You have USC kind of getting LA. But Illinois has never been able to get a foothold. And I think going back to the slush fund and then getting knocked around a bit during the White era, then the Lou Henson issues that we all know about with Bruce Pearl. It's made it tough for Illinois to get that hook in there.
I don't know when that went away. There was a time back in the 40s, way back when I was starting to watch Illinois football, and the 46 team that went to the Rose Bowl, those were overwhelmingly Illinois products. I mean, the Agassiz and the Duffelmeyers and the Winskunis and Zatkoff and that whole gang of players. They had it at one time, but they lost it. Right, I think they lost it right around after. I'd say in the it carried through to 1951. We had a really good team, and when I was in school, and they were almost all Illinois guys. I mean, we had 4 guys from South Shore alone, Tommy O'Connell and Rex Smith and that crew, and we had so it was there once upon a time, but it escaped. And I'm telling you right now, we're not close to being dominant in the state of Illinois. Maybe downstate, but not in the suburbs, where suburbs and Chicago.
Yeah, and that's why the first article I think I wrote when Illini Guys started was the mountain in front of Bielema, and I did exactly what you were talking about. I actually compared Iowa over the last 40 years to Illinois, and you know, for people who, again, I know people don't always appreciate the historical component, but you look at Hayden Fry got hired at Iowa, I think a year before Mike White did, and they kind of went back and forth in ascending their programs, and then White fell off and Makovic kept it there, and then ever since then it's been an Iowa domination, and that has really hurt in those suburbs. I think there's only one way for Illinois to do that. They do have from an NIL perspective, they have a huge presence of billionaires in Silicon Valley. Got to figure out a way to tap that, because I don't think you can. I think you're going to have to create a reason to go to Illinois.
We certainly have tapped it in basketball.
Yes, exactly. And
when Will Riley came, after they already had spent so much on the 2 Europeans and Boswell, and I thought they had run out of money, but they came up with money for Will Riley. I don't know how much, but we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars needed. And it sounds like, if I'm guessing, it sounds like that Underwood said, I can get this guy, and people came through. And we're not talking about small donors here. We're talking about big time. We're talking about billionaires.
That same approach will need to be applied to the football program, and I don't know any other way to do it. Now, I do think you've been around to see many Illini head football coaches. How do you, I'm not saying you can evaluate because eras were different, but how do you compare and contrast Bret Bielema to some of the other men who were in that job?
He's a tremendous organizing leader. He's not going to call plays the way Mike White did offensively, and Makovic. They were offensive guys who had pro background. Of course, he's has some pro background, although not on the field. But Bielema's a good coach, and he runs a really good ship. The thing is, he's got to hold his assistants, and I think he's probably set for a while, unless not he gets a good job offer from someplace. And obviously he's going to go if he gets that. But I think Bielema's good. I think he's a better coach than a lot that we've had. Yeah. I mean, he's legitimate.
Yeah, that was my.
But 5-7 last year. If he went 5-7 again and then 4-8 or something, then he'd be in trouble.
Right. No,
he's against the. He's got to come through this year.
I agree, and he's got to come through against one of the tougher schedules that Illinois has faced. I guess if I was a head coach right now in college football, if I felt sorry for the schedule I was facing, I would go look at Bill Napier down in Florida, and I would look at the last 5 or 6 games that man is facing, and I would go, okay, you know what? Things aren't that bad here, because I don't think I've ever seen a tougher schedule than what Florida faced the last 5 weeks of the season. And I think Bielema is. I really flipped on him. I was not at all excited about him being hired. And then as you get a chance to see his organizational skills and how he works things, I become much more of a Bielema guy by watching how he runs that team.
He runs a good ship. I called. Actually, I texted Alvarez and I said, "Who should this?" Early in the process, I said, "Who should we hire, Barry?" And he and I have always had a good relationship. He sent me back Bret. That's all and he spelled it wrong. And so I said, "Now wait a minute, who's Bielema?" I figured it out finally, and sure enough, that's who we did hire. And he hired him too, so why wouldn't he support him?
Yeah,
he succeeded Alvarez at Wisconsin.
No, trust me, Alvarez is one of my nightmares because my first job out of college was in Madison, Wisconsin. I moved up there in 1990. I had to watch that machine get built, and I moved out in 1995. But I had to watch this team go from an automatic W to a automatic L almost, and it was just horrific to watch that as an Illini fan. You're like, oh my gosh, what's happening in Wisconsin? This is not the pecking order that we've been trained for my lifetime. So Alvarez certainly proved that you get the right man in there and you get support around him, you can turn a program around. Because I don't know about you, but other than Northwestern, I thought in that era, Wisconsin was pretty bad before he got there, and he turned it around to arguably that tier right underneath Ohio State and Michigan.
Yeah, they need a statue for Alvarez up there. That's the kind of job he did.
Yeah, I can't argue with you.
Although Dane had something to do with getting it going.
Yeah,
great Dane.
yeah. No, I agree, and you got to give Pat Richter the understanding of who to hire. You get all those things clicking. I wanted to give you one reference point. If you want to really feel sad for yourself, you look at what Florida's schedule is. Just a nightmare this year. Just to give people an idea, they start off against Miami and at the Swamp. Then they get their little week off with Samford. Then they play Texas A&M, then Mississippi State, UCF, and then all of a sudden it shifts gear where you're at Tennessee, playing a Kentucky team that's been pretty consistent under Stoops.
Better, aren't they?
Then you play Georgia in the neutral site game in Jacksonville. Then you travel to Texas. Then the next week you get LSU at home. Then you get Ole Miss at home. Then you travel to Florida State to wrap the season up. I mean,
man.
I don't know. I don't know that there's I don't know in my history of watching football I've ever seen. I don't know if I've seen a harder schedule than that for a few weeks. So if any Big Ten or even SEC coach who feels sorry for themselves, just basically save the link to the Florida schedule. Take a look at it when you're feeling bad, and you'll feel a lot better, because he's going to have to be 7-0 going into the last 5 games to finish 7-5.
Well, I thought when we scheduled Kansas several years back, I thought we're getting probably one of the worst programs in. And the last time they were any good, when they had Bobby Douglas, who was that great fullback they had with Douglas? Just a great fullback. Way back.
Yeah, this was before my time, Loren.
They came in and they whooped us.
Yep.
And then they go 50 years with nothing, and then they come back, and now they got their best team since the Douglas teams.
Sometimes life isn't fair, and that is incredible. When you look at the next steps, what do you think Bielema's got to do to get this team to elevate?
He's got to find some. He's got he's got to recruit better. Look, every player that we recruit, not transfers. I'm not talking about transfers. Every player that we recruit is a 3-star. There are a million 3-stars. There are fewer 4-stars and fewer 5-stars. The Ohio State doesn't recruit anything but 4s and 5s.
Yeah.
So what we're asking him to do is take a team of 3-stars, and everybody can be wrong on these judgments. You understand, right. But basically what we're saying is he's got to get better players. That's all. And I don't know how he's going to do it. Maybe if you had enough money, you could start to change that. Underwood did it, but he had fewer numbers that he had to get. He only needs 5, 6, 7 players. I mean, real great players. Whereas in football, you've got to find defensive linemen when there aren't any. Right. You know, Illinois is so lucky to have those 2 guys they had last year, and both of them are, turned pro, and they're trying to fill all of these slots. They brought in 16 players, either junior college transfers or transfers, to try to fill all those slots. And I think they've done a good job with Davis at offensive tackle, and I think that the receiver Franklin and the receiver, Brooks, the cornerback, yep. Franklin, the receiver. I think they've gotten some really good players through the transfer market. Can you keep doing that? That's really hard. Common sense tells me he can't get it done, but I've seen others. I've seen what Kansas has done. I've seen what Wisconsin did, and Iowa's been a consistent power for years. I mean, they win more. They win 8, 9 games every year or more. And so it's possible, but boy, it's an undertaking.
Yeah, I really feel like the offensive line's in a better place than we've seen in maybe even decades. And one wonders with what we saw out of the offense the last 3 weeks of the season, with a strong offensive line, and as you talked about, Luke Altmaier returning, maybe there is a chance to keep people guessing and maybe be successful on offense. I get scared about the defensive line. That's what
me too
makes me nervous.
I'm wondering if they'll move one of those defensive ends down to a tackle, or if they'll play a 4-man front. They might do that this year. I mean, but it's always this way. Okay, we're okay at this position. We're okay at that position. There's always a weakness because you just can't quite fill a whole lineup of 22 players that are all at that level. And right now, I would say that the big if on this team is the defensive line. In a league where, they're going to come running at you, and you need to have some pressure on the quarterback when he wants to pass too. Yeah. So it's important. I mean, it's a vital part of the team.
Yeah, and I've been shocked because if you look at the recruiting, you would think with Bret Bielema's resume that there would be players on both offensive and defensive line who'd like to come play for him. And I've been amazed that it hasn't resonated more with some of the defensive linemen that he's been recruiting because of his track record of producing good linemen. When you talk to players, they talk about his personality and how much they like him and when in the recruiting process. And I wonder what the disconnect has been. And the only thing I can think of is, as you said, there aren't enough defensive linemen to go around, and the ones that go to Michigan and Ohio State are probably there's reasons why they go there that might be green, and that might be the difference to get those.
Somebody's going to say, well, what about Newton? Well, you're going to hit on one once in a while like that.
Yeah.
That's a great catch, but he's here. He was here a long time, and he turned out to be one heck of a player.
Yeah. And that puts a lot of pressure on a coaching staff when you can't miss on your evaluations versus let's face it. One of the things that I get in trouble with Ohio State fans is I would say, if you switch the head coach positions, you put Bret Bielema at Ohio State, you get Ryan Day here at Illinois. I'm not certain Ryan Day's going to produce any better of a record than Bret Bielema has. I am pretty certain that Michigan's not going to go in and just slap around the offense and defensive line of Ohio State if Bret Bielema is running that program. So sometimes it helps if your first job's Ohio
I think
State.
you have to worry about that this year.
Yeah.
They're paying their players like pros.
I think we're going to see more 4-year players because if you can make additional funds in the college ranks, why would you not? You put that money in the bank. Let's pivot over to the basketball side. Now, you obviously had the privilege, and I know you had a great friendship with Lou Henson, who in my book was robbed of a national title by Pearl, Knight, and Digger Phelps, because I think he had the players there. We had a fantastic podcast with Dion a couple weeks ago where he talked about some of the players who probably would have been at Illinois. How do you compare how Coach Henson ran the program, and compare and contrast him maybe to Bill Self and Brad Underwood?
Oh boy. Well, they're so different personality-wise. Now, Self and Underwood are a lot alike, but
Okay.
Lou was a different guy, and he had his own. The truth about Lou Henson is what he did at New Mexico State right after Texas Western won the national championship. He beat them 7 or 8 times in a row when they had players back. When they had New Mexico State had nothing, they had center was 6 feet tall maybe, and then 5'6" guards, and he won all those games in a row when Texas Western, as it was then, Texas El Paso, was really, really good. And so he had gotten to the Final Four twice, right?
Yep.
And I think Lou was meticulous about the way he went about things, but he believed, and it worked at the time, wouldn't work now, in just recruiting the state of Illinois. I mean, he didn't go to Iowa, he didn't go to Wisconsin. We did get Glenn Blackwell, but I mean, come on, we get a player here and there every 10 years, but we didn't recruit Indiana at all. And Knight beat him on a lot of good Illinois recruits.
Yep.
But Lou was just a meticulous coach, and he was a lot tougher than anybody realized, because he was so friendly. As soon as practice was over, he was everybody's buddy. But Underwood has gone national, international. I mean, this is a whole different approach to the thing. And he coached in junior college where he had to rebuild the team every year. It doesn't bother him to be having to do that again. Or maybe it bothers him a little bit, but he knows how to do it, and he's willing to do it. He loves to play golf. And last year he played a lot of golf in the summer and got his score down a little bit, got his handicap. But this year he has barely played at all. He said, and the few times he was able to get out, he hadn't practiced. He said he was terrible. We just talked to him 2 days ago. And my point is that he's been working at it. You have to work during the off season now like never before, because now's when your team is being built. And you say, well, in those days, we would look at a player as a sophomore in the state of, oh, look like this guy's going to be pretty good. Then we follow him as a junior. Then we follow him as a senior. And then he'd enroll at Illinois, and he'd be here 3 or 4 years. Maybe I knew some of those players. I knew about those players and followed them for 6, 7 years. Now we got guys coming from Europe I never heard of 2 months ago. And,
Right.
It's just a different world. I mean, we've got 10 new players out of 12, 5 transfers and 5 freshmen. It's just, how do you compare that with Lou Henson? It's they're so different. And Self was he's just a great reader. He could talk. I heard him one day. I was sitting in his office and the phone rang, and we were just having a normal conversation like you and I are having. And he picked up the phone, and it was a player on the other end. His whole voice approach changed. I mean, he was now talking lingo with this guy. And when he hung up, then he was right back talking normally with me.
Yeah, I saw that Self had a superpower, and as a guy who's been a VP of sales, I look at this from a sales view, and I went with my father-in-law to a game over in Springfield, and Self was there to watch Richard McBride and Andre Iguodala, and I watched him walk into the gym, and all of a sudden that Bill Self charisma, it was like a switch. It went on. And I swear, as God is my witness, that every single person who shook his hand or said hello to him walked away thinking Bill Self wanted to see me today. And he and I will tell you, that was just, that charm is so rare, even in the world of sales. A guy or a gal, doesn't matter, who can do that is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And I see a little of that in Shauna Green, to be honest with you, because when she turns on the charm, you think she woke up and I wanted to talk to Mike today, or I wanted to talk to Loren today. And you're like, wow. And that Self, that was, I really watched that with Self. And even in the sales world, you don't see people who can do that.
We can go to practices when Self was here. We could go to practice and watch them every day if we wanted to. They're having 5-on-5 workouts right now in the gym. We won't see this team. I won't see this team unless they give us an opportunity, maybe one or at the very most 2 opportunities before the season gets here. I wouldn't even recognize those guys walking down the street. I never see them. We're not permitted anymore. I mean, it's because of social media. It's your fault. It's social media.
Yeah.
That's what killed us. Those guys would start saying things that you don't say. If somebody sprained an ankle or something and it didn't amount to anything, well, they'd make a big deal out of it on social media. And then, if those of us in the newspaper who knew enough not to worry about minor little things that happen, say the standoff, guy goes in for a drive-in and they're going to fight and they don't, well, they'd report it. I never reported it because I knew if I reported it, I wouldn't be able to go in there again.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something wrong with that, but I mean, I knew what I had to do. And then when the practice was over, Lou and I'd go out and have a drink or something afterwards, and the same thing with Harv back in the day. I used to go I'd go to practice almost every day at 4:00 and maybe half the time at least. And then we'd have a drink or something afterwards. This is now, I'm just I'm too old to begin with, but our media is not allowed to see what's going on behind those walls. We're just guessing.
Yeah. We try to have our sources to try to understand a little bit of what's going on.
Yeah, well, I've got guys that see practice that I talk to. I can get secondhand information, but it's not the same.
Right. No, I totally understand that. I don't altogether get it, because it seems to me the more you have your fans energized, the better, the ticket sales and that. And I do think the one thing that Illinois has in their back pocket, and even if you're creating a super league, is Illinois isn't very good very often, but when they are, Illinois gets ratings when they're good. The problem is you have to wait so darn long in between. Now, Underwood, I want you to compare a little bit, because to me, we're looking at this streak that Underwood's putting together, and it lines up. It's starting to line up to maybe not quite to where Lou Henson had things in the mid 80s, but I'm starting to feel like the good old days are coming back again. Are you getting that?
I think so, but you have, and the team that we have this year might be around at least another year. Most of those players, we do have some. Hummerkaus is not going to be coming back. Obviously, This is the 5th year, but some of those guys should be coming back, and 5 of them are freshmen. The thing that he says, though, and everybody recognizes, boy, if we got a guy out there that's not playing as much as he thinks he should, he gone.
Yeah, I miss the journey. Think about Robert Archibald in his first year versus what he was at the end, or George Montgomery.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
We're not going to see that anymore in today's world.
No, I don't think so.
Which is unfortunate, but I guess if you're the player, maybe it's better to play, a year at Illinois and then go play 3 years at ISU or wherever you transfer to.
Or the other way around.
Yeah. 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 You have those out there too. I look at this team as having maybe a higher ceiling than last year's team if everybody develops. But I also think because you've got so many people, new players, it could have a lower floor than last year's team if you can't get
we got the
everybody
pieces. We've never had any better pieces.
Yeah.
But how will they work together? I don't know until we see them. I don't think I know.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't have a center last year. I mean, we had them, but basically we're playing Coleman Hawkins as a defensive center. Well, that hurt, but he hurt him on the other end offensively. Now we got a center. We got a point guard. We didn't really have a point guard last year. The two most important positions on the team, I've always said, are point guard and center. So we got both those, but are we really going to be better? In the half court, Domas discovered something that made our half court offense really operate better than he was a better half court player maybe than Shannon. Shannon was a better overall player, but you're forced in Big Ten play especially, you're forced to play a lot of half court basketball. They're not going to let you just run up and down. And they're going to keep people back. They're going to force you to set up an offense. You better have a way to break that defense. And we had a way last year that was different than anything we'd ever used before. And that got us to where we were able to get closer to the basket. Now, before that, we had Kofi, and that was another way to get inside. So there are ways to do it. I don't know if the center that we have, Ivisic, I don't know how good he is offensively. He doesn't sound like he's better defensively than offensively.
He's got the ability to stretch the court with the three. He's got nice footwork, and he does have a nice, over either shoulder. But you have to see how that compares with the athleticism he's going to run into in the Big Ten. That's the X factor. And I'm not trying to demean the folks he's played, and he has played grown men. There is a component of this where he may go up against some younger kids and who haven't really hit the weights and haven't went through some of the maturity that some of his opponents have. So it like you said, you're just going to have to wait till competition to see what these guys look like.
Yep. Yeah. We got the pieces, as I say, we just got to fit them together right.
Yeah. And as
Harry's the right guy for that. I'm telling you, he's a good coach.
Yeah. Well, and Harry Carey used to say that potential is a French word that means you haven't done doo-doo yet. So, we take a look at this and maybe this is a high potential team. And the one thing I do think Underwood does have a distinct advantage versus his peers in the Big Ten, and you've mentioned it, is on an annual basis, he's figured out how to get these 12 guys who don't know each other to come together and be a team. And I think in this new world that we're existing in, I think that experience is much more invaluable than Josh Whitman probably even considered it when he was hiring him.
Well, we got a guy that's rolling with the changes, and that's what you have to do. Some coaches have decided to just step out. I think that we got several guys that could have coached several more years, but just didn't want to be a part of it.
Yeah, and I don't blame him. I will tell you, you watched the baseball coach at Texas A&M yesterday.
And unbelievable. One day after he finished his second by one run.
Yes, and one day after, he literally gets mad and dresses down a reporter for asking him a question, and then he up and leaves the press conference. And a day later, it comes out that he's going to the arch rival. So for those who aren't following it, he went from Texas A&M to Texas. And then when I see something like that, then I'm like, well, the players should be able to transfer too.
Look at the resume on almost any coach, and they were here. Why did they move? More money.
Yeah, it's too bad it wasn't that way for sports editors, huh?
Well, yeah, I don't make enough money to even worry about it.
More money. Well, I tell you what,
but I never had a job either.
I'll tell you that when my family first moved to Mahomet in 1979, I would get up and I would be ready for that paper to show up either early morning on the weekends or when we got home from football practice or basketball practice, and it would always be, what did Tate have to say today? And I would just have that paper. I'd be like, oh, he says we're not going to win the title, or we're not going to do this. And I'd throw down the paper, and my dad would be like, well, when was the last time we won the Big Ten? Or when was the last time we won a national title? And I'd be like, we can do it. And I'll stick with Loren's side on this.
It's been a fun ride. I tell you what, I wound up where I wanted to be, and it took a while for me to get here, but I really tried hard in 1963 to get the job, and I applied, and they gave it to a guy from Sporting News, and they said, "Well, we'll give you we'll hire you as an assistant." And I said, "Okay, how much?" He said, $40 a week. I said, "My mother and dad are paying me $75 to run the newspaper in Monticello, you know," and now I'm, I just couldn't. I couldn't. I had to make decisions, but it was based on money in a sense, but man, oh man, can you imagine $40 a week? When I got out of the Army, my dad had been paying his assistant $40 a week. So he was going to give that to me, and my mother said, "Oh, you got to give him more than that. I was making more than that in the Army." And so he gave me 75.
Well, and then the one article that I remember that stood out to me more than any, and I was irate. Not that anything that you wrote in there, but to me, it still goes as the biggest non-NCAA related what if of Illinois. But I still remember the article that you wrote when Russell Cross picked Purdue. Yeah, and I just wonder,
he tricked us.
How different would the Illinois fandom be now if he would have made the decision to go to Illinois like everybody expected? How good would that a team would have been with?
Yeah, I mean, he was the best center around. I mean, it would have made a big difference. But there was another player whose name I've forgotten. Wasn't Alexander? I can't remember the name. But there was another. Alexander. Yeah, there was another center up there did the same thing.
Yeah.
He told our coaches he's coming. He was coming. And then Kansas, correct me if I'm wrong, Kansas had a basketball game in Chicago, and all their big boosters came in to the game. And they were in the same town, and they got a hold of Alexander, and they paid him. They made an offer when you couldn't, and we didn't get him. And that's why. Kansas hadn't had a game in Chicago at that very same weekend that he announced. I think Illinois would have gotten him, but they got to him, and they had them all together, and they said, "Okay, let's get our money together and do this."
Yeah, and I heard it a little bit more color to that, which and I don't know if the facts are all straight because I haven't really researched it. I heard
a long time ago, and I forgot a lot of it.
Yeah, well, I think that was when it was one of those Gavitt type of games, and I think it was in Chicago, and it was Kansas against Duke.
Okay,
and the two players that were a package deal, the guard out of Minnesota, point guard, and then the center Okafor, told both K and Self, or excuse me, K and Self. They said, "Well, we're going to go to Duke," and then Self thought he was going to get that duo, and then now he's got some money left over, and so he's like, "Well, we'll get Cliff Alexander." Now, I will tell you, that's what I heard at the time, and I'm getting older too, so my memory could be off, but it's interesting, in theory, that domino effect could have been there that did that. But I will tell you that the team, that team, that era was so stacked with that Illinois team that the missing piece of
Cross would have made a big difference.
You're looking at a national title contender there.
Sure.
Sure. And that's the one that
you was talking about money left over. The money that Kofi, we had $1 million ready for Kofi, and he left. Who do you think got the rest of that? Shannon.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I'm not saying he got the whole amount, but they had plenty of money after Kofi left because they were prepared to pay Kofi another year, and he signed a contract in Japan for $500,000.
Oh, trust me,
he would have doubled his money if he stayed here.
the people who advised Kofi, shame on them, because they could
Kofi
have.
was part of it. He wanted to go. He didn't want to go to school anymore.
Yeah, if you remember when Myers Leonard came back, it was against Purdue. I was down there for that game a few years back, and I almost bumped into Myers Leonard, and I'm like, goodness gracious, that's a large human being. And then 15 minutes later, getting off the court, I almost ran into Kofi. I'm like, oh my gosh, makes Myers look small. And then 10 minutes after that, I literally bumped into Zach Edey, and that was like watching a spitwad go off a Godzilla. I mean, if that's the largest human I think I've ever been next to. And it just occurred to me, when you look at these guys, and Edey stayed through a little bit and worked on some of his skill sets, and there's a lot of rumblings that tonight he'll end up being a first round draft pick, and fantastic for him, to make it that far. And Kofi,
because we've seen several other centers like Kofi that weren't able to do this, and so all credit to Edey. He's, by the way, Purdue's going to have a hard time replacing him.
Oh.
I mean, they lose 3 of their top 6 players.
Yep.
And everybody's picking them way up, and I'm kind of thinking, I think we'll be able to handle Purdue this year.
I'm so scarred from the past under Gene Cady that I just go, okay, you know what? I'm not going to guess anything, but if we beat Purdue, I'll be very happy. And I just leave it at that. I do think Painter's another guy. I think the Big Ten, has the best basketball coaches in the country. And Painter is, in my estimation, a fantastic coach. And he's one of those guys like Underwood. They may get their pathway to where they go to is different, but they're going to have a team that's good every year.
Well, they got a system, and he's always going to get big players because they throw the ball to him. They throw the ball to their center. And he's made it, and he can show a prospect. He said, "This is what we do. We throw the ball to our centers."
Yep. I was the first person to write an article on Jacobson, that 7'2" kid they've got.
Mm-hmm.
And his dad,
how good he is.
He's good, but physically he's going to need to put some weight on for the Big Ten season. But his father, they actually lived in Barrington for quite some time, and then they moved down to Houston. But he is a very good passer, has a soft touch around the basket. If Illinois would have gotten him, you give him a year with Fletch, and holy cow, because he's got all the intangibles, but in Big Ten play, he's going to have to put on 40 pounds. That's going to be a challenge. And, but again, very few freshmen come into the Big Ten a finished package. Now, Morez Johnson is one that I have been, and Kedrick Prince and I have been really bullish on him back in 2021 when everybody was talking about James Brown. His teammate, we were like, Morez is top 25. We'll take him over James Brown any day of the week. And I will tell you, Morez is amazing because he plays here. This is not a fair comparison, but he has the hustle and intensity that is reminiscent of a Kenny Battle. I mean, he plays. I saw him do something in an AAU game I've never seen. He got knocked to the floor by somebody. He grabs a rebound on both knees, and the other player didn't know what to do, so he kind of fakes a shot from the floor and then does a bounce pass between the guy's legs to somebody else for a layup. And nobody
would tell you that Underwood said Monday that Morez has been the leading rebounder 5 straight nights. They're playing 5-on-5, right now.
Oh yeah.
And
yep.
Said he's been the leading rebounder every day.
Does not surprise me. I watched him play enough AAU ball. He is one of those kids. You can't teach that. You've been here, watch the Illini. There's certain players that they've got that fight, they've got that push, that burning to make a difference. And Morez, I think that will help him as he, adjusts to the Big Ten, is the fact he's going to play harder than everybody else. And the other thing that got me on him, which I think has made him pretty rare, but if you watched a game with Ty Street's Mean Streets team, Morez would call out defenses and he would tell his teammates where to go. So he's a leader. But what really surprised me is while he's a decent offensive player, but he's not a guy who has to score, he would help guys on what they were doing. Not guys, obviously, who played his position, but he would be, you know, playing the post or playing the four, and he's telling the two and the three guy what to do on a play because maybe these guys just got on the team or maybe they're out of position. And to me, that made me think, you know, there's a potential there that if you don't understand basketball, you may not see as much. But he is not just a guy who's a great athlete. He's a guy who thinks about the game.
It's a shame we can't watch some of these practices with Ivisic and Morez going against each other, you know,
Well,
on the post.
And that will tell a lot about both guys when Ivisic gets here and Morez gets a chance to go against him. You'll really be able to tell what we've got. And I think it's interesting, but you know, steel sharpens steel, and maybe these two, you know, Morez is a big guy, but not Ivisic size, but he's quickness and he's got intensity. Maybe they'll help make each other better, which is the ultimate thing you want in a practice.
Yep.
Well, Loren, any final thoughts? Was there any questions that you thought I might ask you or that I didn't, that you were all prepared for, that you want to give me an answer?
No, I think most of my concerns are just what's happening in this crazy world and what's going to happen to all the non-revenue sports with this house settlement, way it affects. It's just going to throw everything for a loop. I see football and basketball somehow separating themselves from everything else. Maybe we'll have conferences in these other sports that are more regional, geographical, and I look forward to that. I don't look forward to Rutgers having to go to Washington.
Yeah.
You know, in anything.
I worry about that, though, because what you just said was logical, and I'm not certain that when you throw Washington, D.C. and the NCAA into the same sentence, I'm not certain if logic is going to come out the other end. We'll find out. It is certainly it's what, about 180 degrees from what you started covering as to where we're going.
Yeah, and we're going to, you know, some of these players now are going to be on their campuses for like one semester and gone. Or basketball, you'd have to be there 2 semesters, but
right.
Football, you might just show up for the fall and bye-bye.
Yeah.
Might not want to even play in a bowl game. You know, I don't want to play in a bowl game. I want to go pro. I want to play pro.
Yeah. And I think the NIL contracts will take care of that. If you're going to play, you know, I think they're going to want you to play in the bowl games. And there's a part of me, and I know Josh didn't agree with me, but there's a part of me that wonders, do we need the conference championship games if you're going to have a 12 or 16 game playoff? And then I also wonder, is there a real need for bowls anymore?
Well, that's a whole other subject, but there are a lot of places that want to hold a bowl game, you know, and
yep.
And a lot of coaches want that. It is now the goal. I mean, unspoken goal, but it's the goal of the University of Illinois simply to win enough games to get to a bowl game.
Exactly.
I mean, that's our deal now. That's about the most we can expect to do. I don't think we can make a 12-team playoff, but be nice if we could.
We would have come pretty dark. I mean, a couple breaks, maybe like a penalty flag thrown in the last 2 minutes of the Michigan game. Illinois might have made it to a Big Ten championship game, which probably is about the peak.
Got killed there.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say
as Iowa did and as Purdue did.
Yeah, I'm going to side with. I'm going to choose my friends of Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph, and I'm going to say they would have made a difference and it would have been close because those are two big guys that I wouldn't want on the wrong side. 2 more
guys just like that this year too.
Yeah, exactly.
To rise out of the surprise and perform that way, because those interior line positions, if you aren't pretty good there, they're going to punch holes in you.
Yeah, and that's the problem in the Big Ten. There's no even look, even the quote bad teams are pretty tough. You know, and Signetti's out. He's already trying, you know, he's stolen a recruit, and you've got Greg Schiano that you really wonder if he could go back in time. Would he have just stuck at Rutgers and kept building what he built there, you know? And now he's got their recruiting on a higher level. So there's no easy W's in the Big Ten, not a single one.
Thank you much.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you coming on today, Loren. We could talk forever. Since Illini Guys started almost 4 years ago, Loren has been one of the great lights. He's always been willing to help out or sit down and talk with us. And it's great to see that, especially somebody who's got all of his experience. We can ask questions and learn a lot. So
You
thank
got
you
some
so
good
much.
guys working for you too.
Oh, you got Brad and Larry, Matt
Yeah.
and Ked. We got a great group
You
of
got a
people
really
there.
good staff.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to have such good people. And obviously, anytime Loren Tate wants to come on any of our shows, we get him on, period, end of sentence. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay. Anytime. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much to Loren Tate for taking time out of a busy day to speak with us. There's a lot of people who are covering Illini sports. I don't think they get any classier and they don't have any more knowledge than Loren Tate does. And we greatly appreciate the positives that he provides. He's always willing to talk with us and help out the Illini guys. And certainly he has been a treasure trove of information for Illini fans. Must read since 1966 and still going strong. He is an amazing reporter. And I'm telling you that when I look at people who are reporting on college teams, I compare him to Loren Tate. So he's the gold standard. We appreciate him coming on. If you enjoy these type of things, really consider subscribing at IlliniGuys.com. We will have articles from Brad Sturdy. He does his Sturdy for 30 series. People love that. Ked's recruiting roundup. Ked will keep you up to date on all the recruiting. We have Matt Stevens, who I feel, just my own personal opinion, is the best writer of anybody covering the Illini today. Now, that's subjective. I get it. But his writing skills are out of this world. Of course, Larry Smith, he's on the WNBA on Ion every week during WNBA season. So tune that in on Friday nights. And obviously, former CNN sports anchor. And we will also have Steve Sturm, who does his football recruiting spotlights. Steve will go through a season full of films of a high school commit or a transfer commit and break down that player. You get all that. Plus, you get our message boards where you can talk to all of us. You can talk to other fans, go back and forth. It's a lot of fun. IlliniGuys.com, $99 a year. It's really a good value. And of course, if you like the podcast, you can subscribe to your favorite podcast distributor. We're on just about all of them. Or if you like to watch them visually, and I don't know why you'd want to see me, but Loren, he's worth that. You can go to our IlliniGuys.com YouTube channel. You can subscribe there and make sure that you don't miss anything as well. Finally, if you can share these things on social media, share it with somebody you know is an Illini friend on a text message. That is hugely important to us. Please go ahead and do that. That just helps us reach more people, and it helps more people get to know what's going on with the Illini. Whether you're in Champaign or Chicago, halfway across the country or halfway across the planet, IlliniGuys.com keeps you in the know. Until next time, go Illini.